Hello, everyone, and most welcome to Heidegger 1780. And we will today continue where we left off with tasting the little scroll, a sensory analysis of divine interaction in Revelation 10:8 to 10 by Meredith Warren. And we talked last time about the body coming into meaning, or body makes meaning possible. Without the participatory role of the body, there is little or almost no meaning to the words. They do not participate. We had an example of different authors, actually one of them that we've been taking before, who made the words into empty metaphors, not metaphors of the ordinary kind, but empty. Köster was one of the ones pointed out here. That puts a distance into the words, make them mean less. This is what we call anti-conceptual. So when they use the expression metaphor, it is to not make something vivid or picturesque or imagery. It is to show that they have no connection to the meaning themselves. Yes, it's the flavors. It's a very good quote there by Meredith. The flavors evoke the efficacy of his message. There are two components of this analysis. First is the fact that the intimacy of the senses, the sense of taste, has ramification for creating bonds between those who share tastes with divine realm. Second is the cultural expectations around sweet and bitter foods. These are the things that makes the Bible have meaning. If we take away the body, and as we mentioned, singing, liturgy, the meaning will be lost. So although it, for the secular person, the atheist, it seems unnecessary to do the things, you think you can have the meaning just by having the words, or in some sense projected to your inner, whatever that could be. But we know from science and from cognition that that is not true. Meredith is in the article effectively pointing to how meaning comes about, how words gain their sense in their vast connectivity, something that we went into with the Goldfarb article. They deeply connect, I would say, the Meredith Warren article and Goldfarb. We know also Christianity remains in those areas in the world where people do things, they interact, whether it's liturgy, singing, participating in the communion, being active. And we also know that Christianity has ceased to exist in the other areas where there is no doing. where the empty concepts ring hollow, one could say, to be a bit poetic. To imbibe the communion or ingest the Holy Scroll is definitely to participate to an extensive, very extensive room. You can reach divinity, the divine, by participating. And I continue on page 113, where I left off. It is the second paragraph in Meredith's rather long paragraphs. The intimacy of the sense of taste compared with other senses plays a role in the bounding function of heavenly ingestion. The sense object is internalized by the eater when it is tasted. As such, interacting with the divine realm through taste is more profound than auditory discourse or visual interactions with a heavenly being. The eater of heavenly food is therefore closely associated with the place of origin of the consumed item, in this case, heaven. While visions and auditory revelations might be equally viewed by others nearby, taste is experienced privately. In this way, the divine is experienced most intimately. It may be for this reason that apocalyptic texts tend to include hierophagic events more frequently as compared with texts outside of the genre. A certain intimacy with the divine facilitates the acquisition of specialized, hidden, privileged knowledge. In Revelation 10, John of Patmos internalizes the open scroll. Its contents are thereby rendered inaccessible to every other being. Only John then is in possession of both the contents of God's message and of the ability required to prophesy again. In consuming the scroll, John is uniquely situated as the mouthpiece of the divine realm, since its ingestion has given him access to God in a way that no other human in Revelation has. Given that taste plays such a role in John's experience with the divine, the specific flavor of the scroll is significant. John experiences the scroll as bitter when it leaves his mouth and enters his stomach, even though it was sweet, like Ezekiel's at first. This sweet taste operates as a symbol by which the eater interprets his experience. That divine food tastes sweet is a prominent trope in ancient literature. For example, nectar and ambrosia. In Septuagint wisdom of Solomon describes the manna, food from heaven, as ambrosias trophis, and history of Rechabites recounts how the inhabitants of the Isles of the Blessed consumed water that comes from the ground, tasting like honey, that is nectar. God's words are described as sweet, as in wisdom, throughout the Psalms and Proverbs. whereas Ezekiel's taste experience is unambiguously sweet, John of Patmos is forced to reinterpret his taste experience with the scroll, whose sweetness turns bitter once ingested. Most scholars of Revelation interpret the tastes metaphorically, so that the sweetness corresponds to the salvation to be expected by the Christian community, while the bitterness indicates the necessary suffering to be experienced in order for salvation to be accomplished. However, I propose that the bitter taste, in light of contemporary medical knowledge, represents the efficacy of God's message in John's mouth. While it might seem odd to initiate a conversation between a literary apocalyptic text and a technical medical one, I do so not assuming that John had any medical training or that he had read such texts. Rather, I understand these texts as preserving in a different genre the culture's assumptions about senses and specifically about taste. Medical texts from antiquity are clear that bad tasting remedies are more effective in delivering cures, and more informal texts, such as letters, confirm that this was also an understanding held by those outside the medical community. This excerpt from a letter supposedly sent from Emperor Julian the Apostate, but likely falsely attributed, indeed suggests that bitterness is inherent in medicinal substances. Indeed, Hippocrates says that honey, though it is sweet to the taste, is quite bitter to the digestion. And I can believe this statement, for all agree that it produces bile and turns the juices to the very opposite of its original flavor, which face even more surely convicts it of being in its origin naturally bitter. For it would not change to this bitterness if in the beginning this quality had not belonged to it, from which it changed the reverse. Honey, according to this text, tastes sweet, but it must be inherently bitter. This reaffirms the earlier understanding of honey preserved by the first century Common Era physician and botanist Dioscorides, who believes that honey's properties are purgative, opening, stimulating of the humors, and for that reason it is helpful to rinse for dirty wounds and ulcers. Julian and Dioscorides know this because honey is very effective medicine, and because the most effective medicine is bitter in flavor. Therefore, honey must actually be bitter to digest. This logic bears the reasoning behind the sensory imagery in Revelation. In other words, the bitter taste that John experiences marks this hierophagic experience as the most effective even over that of Ezekiel, who only experiences the sweetness of divine interaction. John's charge to the prophecy again, therefore, carries authority through this sensory description. Conclusions. Hierophagy, I argue, is the rhetorical mechanism by which John expresses the divine origins of the message that the angel gives to the seer. As such, examining Revelation 10.8 to 10 in the context of hierophagy illustrates how this text fits within the framework of this category of culturally understood narrative consumption. This study of Revelation, however, also showcases an important aspect of how hierophagy functions, which is through taste. The widespread use of this trope, not only in apocalyptic texts such as Revelation, but across multiple genres in antiquity, also illustrates the importance of carrying out this kind of analysis on other texts that include this type of sensory experience. Examining the trope of hierophagy allows us to understand more fully how ancients thought about interactions between human beings and the divine realm, and specifically how taste is used in narrative to mediate or breach the boundary between these two realms. Further, hierophagy highlights the importance of analyzing taste as a means of internalizing and absorbing knowledge. The prevalence of this mechanism of gaining divine knowledge in ancient texts indicates that hierophagy played a role in how ancients thought about their relationship to divine realms. Revelation makes use of the literary trope of hierophagy to express how John gains access to the divine realm and shares an intimate relationship with the divine. In this way, the text legitimates the divine origins and contents of the revelations that John has written down in the book of Revelation. The ingestion of the scroll participates in a culturally understood way of interacting with the divine realm, one which grants the eater both direct transmission of divine knowledge and also the means of transmitting the knowledge to a community. The revelation that John puts into words and indeed puts into visions is identifiable as the contents of the open scroll that he consumes. The message of God has changed form. From being edible to being visible, and from visible to audible in the form of the text of revelation. John first ingests the scroll, then visualizes its contents, namely the rest of revelation. He likewise writes down what he sees and transmits this to his audience. This change of form from edible to readable is significant. John shares his intimate access to the divine when he transforms his taste experience into the visions that make up revelation. The fact that revelation is written to the 7 assemblies confirms that the contents of the book, that is John's revelatory experiences, are to be shared with an audience. But John alone experiences God's message directly. When he consumes the scroll, it allows him to ingest, digest, and internalize the divine revelation. That he is asked to prophesy again indicates that the rest of the book, with its specific details about the timeline for the end times, emerges from the consumption of the little scroll. John's ingestion of the scroll signifies his special access to the divine realm in a way that his audience cannot participate in directly. although they understand its rhetorical force. They are put at arm's length from God and access God's revelation through John, their mediator, just as John has accessed God's revelation through the mediator of the angel who feeds him the little scroll. That the content of John's revelation is the result of hierophagy, that it has been imparted from the divine realm and internalized by John, leads authority to its message. Examining this scroll event as hierophagy demonstrates how John's ability to understand and communicate the divine message is closely tied to his ingestion of heavenly food. And that terminates the reading of Meredith J.C. Warren's article. Let's look for some quotes. I think already at page 102. The first line in the third paragraph there. Paragraph 1, 2, and 3. So go down a bit. There. So the first line here indicates, I think, the understanding that Meredith Warren has. She explains this way, and that gives the lead of the article. In a text rich with somatic imagery, the language of taste in this episode is a rhetorical tool that expresses a specific meaning. I argue that the author uses the image of ingesting a scroll to communicate the legitimacy of John's revelatory experiences and indeed the authority of the book of Revelation as a whole. Specific movement we can change, specific meaning we can change to movement, as we learn from Goldfarb Johnston, Edmund Dane, Joachim Schulte. The text is going to be only idle until it gets impregnated with the ingestion of the scroll. First, then, you get both the superposition and the specific. In page 104, 9 lines down. So it started. Sensory analysis has become an increasingly prominent methodological tool, especially in fields such as anthropology, where scholars such as David House have recognized the importance of non-visual, non-oral sensory experience in Western and non-Western cultures alike. I think it could be a good advice to look into maybe some text of House at some point. Clearly, Meredith is seeking support to make Revelation come true, to become real for her. One can imagine that she'd been struggling with an empty Revelation and an empty Bible, like most people do these days, and therefore stir clearly away from it. And we go to have a little look here. Page 105. The ingestion of the little scroll marks a shift in the content of the book as a whole. The rhetorical force of John consuming the scroll in chapter 10 is highlighted by the inclusion of a scroll earlier in the text. And in the quote we found here from Revelation 5:2-3, we saw that the scroll was similar to the Möbius strip, because it was both sealed and unsealed. The Möbius strip has this magnificent power coming from reality itself, that it is both an opening and a closure. And ingesting it is actually turning it inside out. The knowledge of the scroll becomes inside of the person and can therefore also participate in the outsideness. Something that can effectively be shown by the Klein bottle. Yeah, here we have a Klein bottle, and it shows that if you can click one of the photos, maybe. Yeah. Inside and outside are participatory. That understanding, that godly and Christian understanding, was vivid and real. This is oddly enough how space looked like, not the cubic XYZ of the later development during Middle Ages. The inside is constantly participating in the outside because it is the same thing. The church in the Western regions especially has practiced Newtonian or Cartesian coordinate system on religion, and therefore forced God out of liturgy and the experience of revelation. Page 106 at the end here. Just as those who are set apart by the seal of God belong to God, so too those who are marked with the sign of the beast belong to the beast. That is the Newtonian eradication of the message of revelation and many other things, is the sign of the beast. Page 108. In the second paragraph, 4 lines down. Seven angels are given trumpets, and another angel takes a censer of incense to the altar. We read how the smoke of the incense rises up along with prayers to God. When the angel takes his censer, fills it with fire from the altar, and throws it down onto the earth, there are lightning, voices, thunder, and an earthquake, to be compared with a bitter taste. Without making it too longish, I will end with one last sight. It's page 109 at the very end. In fasting, for example, remember the inside. We are reaching into the inside. Humans separate themselves from ordinary life, creating space for the divine realm to punctuate the earthly realm. By ingesting, by doing things, by participating, as I also mentioned in the last, together, not by any idea of an innerness that Paul Johnston showed to be a fantasy, but instead true innerness, true soul that is reached by doing things. We know from instance, by Lisa Bartet-Feldman that most people today lack innerness. They cannot make introspection. They have no access to their spiritual and deeper areas. And they are usually stranded in the beta waves that Dr. Joe Dispenza called the realm of the obvious or the repetition. The deeper ones like gamma and delta and theta are very seldom today reached, but by participating in liturgy, participating in the Caesar I showed with the incense, and is in the case of ingestion, hierophagy of scrolls, you will be able to attain that knowledge, that understanding to the fullest. There was a mentioning of 90 books, and I think that is showing to the extensive amount of knowingness, and knowingness that is mostly gone today. I'm not 100% sure it was 90. It could have been 89 or 999. This ingestion is the reaching out. 94 books, excellent. 24 being the Jewish scripture in some formation, and the rest to be kept for only the wise to read. In many parts of the world, people are training their intellect, their thinking capacity, so they can recite the whole of Brahma Sutra, the Upanishads, or the Quran. In the Christian remaining areas of the world, they know their Bible in a real way, with a voice that tingles with sense and meaning, not a vibratorless voice, but the ingested voice that Meredith J.C. Warren so clearly is pointing to in her article. It was a quite lovely article. It was, we say, a snap better than her previous. She is a lady with a keen interest in Christianity. Kalle, maybe some comments from you?
Thank you. I do agree that this phrase is beautiful, even in fasting, for example, humans separate themselves from ordinary life, in space for divine realm, the term.
Yes, yeah, right. Indeed.
So it's in the doing, to say, Hans.
It's in the doing, it's in the act, and you also connect to the inner, which makes it possible to bring that to the outer.
And I think the significant thing in this paper by Professor Warren was on page 106. It's about this scroll. There's a significant change. After John eats the scroll, specific time units are used, such as time, times, and halfa time, 42 months, or 1260 days, each adding up to about 3.5 times. So why is this important? So, well, we often think about Schrödinger's and there we have the observation that makes the superposition to collapse. And in Wittgenstein's example with the rabbit and duck is still the observation, the eyes that makes the so-called observed superposition to collapse. To make a quantum physical application of it. But here we have actually the same idea applied to the senses. And why is this? This is actually more clearer than Schrödinger's cat and rabbit and duck, because here the time enters the experiment in a clearer way. We know, thanks to the Miller-Witt equation from 1970s, that time is created after the fact. So when we observe the cat in the box, whether it's live or dead, time is created. If the cat is dead, we know time is created after the fact, that after the observation, we know that the cat was dead, for instance, half an hour or whatever. And here also, the time is created after the digestion, not after the observation, but after the digestion.
Yes, that's when time becomes explicit. Before it's idle. Well, yeah, very good.
So this is really quantum physical, applied to the tastes and not to the eyes only, so to say.
No, it goes to show that this early and true Christendom is the true one because it refers to reality, not the later Newtonian or Cartesian.
And let me take a here. I think it's important. Here on the word training. I do not. I do so not assume that John had any medical training, etc., etc. But there is one author of the New Testament who had medical training, and that was Luke. We know that he was a medical doctor. He helped.
Okay.
Yes, for instance, he helped Apostle Paul with his medical problems, and we also know that in Luke's Gospel, but also in the Acts written by Luke, there is more medical imagery. The medical vocabulary is prominent in contrast to the other books. So why is this interesting? Yes, I want to mention a passage. Let me see. There's a
David House, there he is, yeah.
I will not, let me read it. Lisus blood, sweating blood. So this is a famous passage. Let me see. This is relevant. Oh, what is happening? Of how internet is working. Let me see. Let me take this. Luke 22, verse 44. And being in anguish, Jesus prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. If you look into a Greek New Testament edition, there you will find that these words are placed within parentheses, within square brackets. They don't think that this is authentic. Because you don't find them in 4th century manuscripts such as Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. But I think they are authentic. And Luke, being a doctor, he knew what he was speaking about.
Oh yeah, I see what you're getting at, yes.
This is, so to say, all the senses are there. The text is a very passionate moment, so to say. He prayed more earnestly, his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. So if you ask a New Testament scholar, most of them would say this is not authentic. So it's this they put within square brackets. You don't see this in translation. But here you see it actually in this has been actually deeply distressed language almost to the point of death. Oh no, this is amplified, but this is very amatorial. It's not in the right place. Anyhow, so and let's see. There are some square brackets here actually. Here you have one square bracket, but you don't actually understand where it starts. But I think the MEREDITH's paper shows that we have to take taste seriously.
Well, it's part of the soul, so to speak. Emil Gilchrist shows that we will find the spiritual, the intellectual, and the abstract.
So this was a great takeaway was the quantum physical application, so to say, of the time is created after the taste. That is the great takeaway of this paper, I would say. So perhaps we should leave it there.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great article. I liked it. Thank you very much, Kalle Lundahl. Excellent comments as usual. Thank you everyone for listening in. Why, thank you, Meredith Warren. There she is. Lovely looking she is. And thank you everyone for listening in. Have a very good day, afternoon, morning, wherever you are. Bye bye for now.